So I love getting your comments and even like novel length comments, but for sake of brevity, I'm going to just get to the question portions of this comment from Propterhawk, where he's responding to the way that I have carry over from my career into my real life, wherein I don't drink at all because I associate it with the things that I see on the job, and also things like the smell of buttered popcorn in movie theaters reminding me of the funk of homeless people. He had similar experiences with weed, where he would try to work with people who were smoking cannabis and they had a lack of motivation, which was very frustrating for him. And so he asks the question. I guess my other question would be, given that you deal with such a wide range of similar abuses, what is your threshold where you start to feel that frustration? Would something like cigarette addiction be enough to solicit that kind of response? I don't really get frustrated when I see someone smoking a cigarette in public. When I get frustrated is when I see somebody who has COPD who is on a respirator that they might have to carry around with them, and they've got, the cannula on their nose, and they take that off in order to start smoking a cigarette. Hopefully they take it off because they've got pure oxygen coming, close to their face, and they're sticking that cigarette close to their face. It's just not a very good mix. But yeah, there are certain situations where you're like, God damn it. What is it going to take to get through to you that you should quit doing that? And just seeing casual smokers who haven't been doing it for that long, it doesn't really get to me as much as when you see somebody who lives with the obvious signs that they should quit, all the time, and then they still smoke in the face of that. That is frustrating. And it's very daunting to think that you could change that sort of a person who, they have what should be very motivating factors in their lives, that would have brought about a change in most people. Something similar to that was the reason my father had eventually stopped smoking, and that was that my stepmother, his wife, had lung cancer and had a lung transplant. And so, in order to respect her new lungs that could be damaged by his smoking, he first was just smoking outside the house, like going into the garage and whatnot. And then it got to the point where he just didn't want the smoke that would be stuck to his body, the lingering smoke, on him when he came back into the house. So he finally just quit. There are other things that I find frustrating. Before marijuana was completely legalized for like recreational use here in Colorado, there were a subsect of the cannabis activists that even after the advent of medical marijuana here in Colorado, they were pushing for recreational, and they were saying things like cannabis cures cancer. And you can find this on my channel where I film activists and also me talking about this. And yeah, they were making a whole bunch of outlandish claims about what cannabis is good for. Basically, you take a snake oil salesman from like nostalgic, like early 1900s era, like snake oil salesman, and how he would talk about his snake oil being able to cure every goddamn thing on the planet. That's what these people sound like, right? They anything that is wrong with you, cannabis cures it, and the government's been trying to hide the cure, and that is kind of frustrating to run into. And I haven't seen it as much since we've had recreational marijuana legalized. But right before that, it was a very common thing to see people trying to make this argument to bring people to maybe be more likely to vote for legalization. So I imagine it's still a very big thing in those states where they still need to legalize cannabis. Need to. They don't need to, but they probably want to. Yeah, that's something that elicits this kind of response in me, where I'm like, you know, I deal with the problems that arise from people using cannabis, and a lot of people can use it and never run into the ill effects that I would see on the job, But it does tend to exacerbate the problems of people who have existing mental illnesses, especially when they get put into a clinical setting, residential style, and they're not allowed to use it anymore. You can really see how it might have been masking problems that otherwise could have been dealt with in a way that was sustainable. There's not enough research done on how much cannabis can make these psychiatric problems even worse. And there's also just anything that you're smoking, anything that you are combusting and putting into your lungs has carcinogens, right? Now cigarettes have a lot more additives to them, so to where they are, markedly worse. And as far as the deaths that are attributed to each drug, cigarettes just take the cake as far as being the deadliest drug in America, right? But anything that you are combusting to put inside yourself, it's a bad thing to do. There are other methods that would be better for your lungs and for your risk of cancer. But to address that, there are people who just use edibles here in Colorado, and that's at least harm reduction. But still, I find that the greatest problem with cannabis use is those people who say that it's not addictive and still cannot stop in the face of things like not being able to pass a drug test in order to get employment, or being on paper as far as probation and parole, and getting urine tested and coming up hot on that, and they're not able to put away the cannabis long enough to just get off paper. Every time they come up hot with a piss test, that's a chance that they can extend their amount of time on probation or parole. And, these things that should be just a set length of time gets extended for every infraction, And the criminal justice system is bogged down as it is, so to the point where people can actually have a couple dirty UAs while they're on probation and not have their time extended because the system is just bogged down. But after the first few dirty UAs, if they don't start producing clean ones, they'll be referred to treatment, or they will not get their number killed. They will stay on probation and parole for an extended length of time that they could have avoided if they just put it down for a couple months, right? And they can't do it. It is one of those cliches to hear when people say, I can put this down anytime I want, and then they don't. Even when they need to, in order to get a job or satisfy, a criminal justice sentence, they just don't. And this is one of the hallmarks of addiction. In the face of adverse effects in your life, you still can't put it down. So that's a frustrating thing that I run into a lot. Is it's not so much seeing people using, it's the arguments themselves, the cliched statements that people make about their drug use. That's what that it tends to frustrate me, because I have just like one-off sentence sort of scripts that I can just spew like I I I can turn it on and be a counselor in my regular life. Just take my work home with me, but I don't want to. I don't want to be that guy. You know, I'm not trying to ruin everybody's good time. I'm trying to help the people who really have had their lives destroyed by substances. Um, Another thing that I find a little bit frustrating is the difference between addictions that involve things that you can control and things that you can't control, as far as being presented with them. And this could be an opioid addiction where somebody genuinely has a pain management problem from injuries or disease, to where they pretty much need to take something like an opiate to have a normal life, or food addiction. People who are overeaters, you can't get away from food. You still need a little bit of food. You know, and also sex addiction. You know, or gambling addiction for a businessman, because there are certain risks that you take with any business, uh, and those risks can look a lot like tiny versions of the risk of just putting money in a slot machine and pulling the arm. And so to compare those types of addictions to the other types sometimes is frustrating for me, because people will use the same idioms and the same logic for how you would treat someone who is an alcoholic with somebody who is an overeater. And it just doesn't work that way. You can't say one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. That's something that you would say with alcohol or drugs, right? With something that's like food. Because if one is too many, then you would not eat and you'd die within, 2 weeks max. You know, Eating is important. You need some sustenance coming in. It's about moderation with that kind of problem. You know, and to see people just using the same style of logic for every problem out there, that's what starts to be frustrating to me. And here on YouTube, I would say people who use the word triggered outside of the clinical sense, where it's used for people who have actual PTSD, and they use this watered down version of it for I disagree with something that I saw. That gets to me a little bit. And there are other terms that they get misused, and I just think it gets bottled up within me, and I get kind of frustrated with the way that people use clinical terms in order to give their feelings more respect than they deserve sometimes. Your feelings are no more weighted if you say that you were triggered by something, if you are just trying to make yourself seem like you were injured by somebody else saying something, you know, and it's legitimately hurting you. So now they have to stop. You know, there needs to be a warning label put on it and all that, because it gets hard for me to even describe how frustrated I get when I see these things. Yeah. Next question. Bruce Shepard asks, in your profession, what is your opinion of people like me with past addictions giving private counsel and, say, encouragement, direction, and motivation? I think it's perfectly okay for people to be a part of a support group and give people support with their experience in how to get out of the binds that they're in and how to cope with their problems and whatnot. That sharing your experiences is a great thing. There's a distinction between counseling and support legally, because there are certain, you know, quality measures that are written into law, certain confidentiality measures that are written into law for professionals. But for people who haven't gone down the professional path, I think it's still okay to share your experiences. I will say that in the professional setting, there are 40% of people in my field, in the field of addictions, have had past dealings with their own problems with addictions. And that's a huge amount compared to any other profession. And I've seen people who you wouldn't even be able to tell that they have had past run-ins with addictions because they're so professional. And I've also seen a certain type of person who is in the profession for maybe the wrong reasons. They want to give back in order to befriend all the people that come after them who are dealing with addictions, and sometimes to like a pathological level of needing to befriend people. I've seen people who have gone through addictions and want to connect with people who are going through it. And they oftentimes are the ones who have the hardest time with boundaries, such as not buying someone's Boy Scout popcorn or Girl Scout cookies from their kids, be it the counselor or the client who has the kid who is selling the stuff. That's something that in a professional relationship with, you know, client and counselor, that should not happen ever. Nor Avon or any of the other multi-level marketing things. You shouldn't be selling doTERRA supplements or essential oils between client and professional. That's just wrong. None of that. And also they have the most problem with the dual relationships thing of not dating your clients. That's a correlation between the people who had past addictions and the people who end up losing their licenses over having relations outside of their counseling relationship. It's a problem. So, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of experience that people would have right off the bat with having a previous experience with drugs. But you could also see that with people who come from criminal justice background, like former cops becoming addiction counselors. You know, they'll know a lot of the lingo, they'll know a lot of the logistics of how certain substances are used or procured. You know, and they won't have to be caught up to speed like somebody who, say, just went to college for psychology and was a bookworm the entire time and never had any experiences. You know, but after a while, everyone just sort of gets up to speed and doesn't look awkward when they're talking about substances. And yeah, I don't know that it would give you too much of a leg up on anyone else. I really feel like the ability to reach people transcends whether or not you have had previous experiences. And what's actually most important is being able to connect with people on their level, and you don't need experiences for that. And sometimes it takes an array of different people on staff with an organization in order to reach all the different people. There will be clients that a particular person will never be able to reach, and so being able to refer them to somebody who can is many times a great thing. All right. That's the end of the questions I have backed up. I'll make one more video in this series about something near and dear to me. And you guys will see some emotion